Hello everybody and welcome back once again. Today's video is going to be a little bit different in that it's not going to be a layout update or video of me trackside. Instead, I'm going to be giving you a how-to video, and what you're looking at right now are tunnel liners. It's a super cheap, easy, inexpensive way to build a tunnel liner, and it really improves the overall look of your layout and scenery. So if you'd like to learn more on how to do this, stay tuned. So I'll be showing you how to make the tunnel lining for this small little tunnel on the grade, and I've already, like I said, I've already gone ahead and started some of the work, and basically I've had to carve out the foam a little bit already on the inside. I've had to make these gaps or holes in the foam a little larger in order to fit the tunnel lining through, and I actually ended up taking out some other structural work of my sub scenery, which just was again more foam that would support the tunnel portal originally. I took that all out, and now it's just one clean gap all the way through that will eventually house the tunnel lining. So now let's go over to my little temporary workbench, and I'll show you the tools and the materials that you will need in order to build yourself one of these tunnel linings. Now here are the supplies and tools that you will need in order to make a tunnel lining. First is white glue. I use white glue because it needs to dry hard, and I'll show you what I mean further down the road. The second is this painter's paper material. You can use like packing paper. The only thing I don't recommend is newspaper because it's a little bit thin. You can even use as a substitute like a really thin cardboard, like the cardboard that you'd find on your cereal box. That will work as well, but it'd be a different application than that, which I will not be showing you today, but you can probably kind of figure it out for yourself. Hot glue gun and an extra couple glue sticks, a X-Acto knife, some scissors. I find I use the X-Acto knife more. The scissors you can use to cut the cardboard, but it is a little bit more difficult than the X-Acto blade. A tunnel portal is optional. I use the tunnel portal for measuring purposes and to trace it. I just find it's a little easier if you have one, but you can just take the basic dimensions offline and figure it out like that. And also cardboard, and then one thing I don't have on there already is a pencil or a pen. And that is all you will need for this project. And actually an exception to that is further down the road. It's like one of the last steps is like a drywall putty or filler material. You don't need a lot of it, you just need enough, and I'll show you what I mean further down the road when we get to that point. So the next step in making your tunnel lining is you want to cut out two long strips, about maybe 1.5 inches wide, as long as your tunnel is. So these aren't 100% accurate to what I'm telling you to do, because I've already actually done it for my tunnel lining. But you take this and you just kind of, we'll say this tunnel is straight, but it actually has a slight curve to it, so if it does, then you'll have to take that into account and cut this cardboard strip to the curvature of the track and the tunnel. But you're just going to want to measure it out and make sure that it reaches from point A to point B. Now once you've done that and you have two of those strips, one for either side, you're going to go ahead and you're going to cut out as many of these little squares as you think you will need in order to provide enough structural support for the paper that you'll be using later on. Now, how I got to this point was I just used the tunnel portal, laid it on a piece of cardboard, traced it, and that's what I came out with. Something to note is that I traced exactly the arch of the tunnel portal. You're actually going to cut a little larger than that just to add a little bit of working room when you are installing the next steps after that. So if you take a look at this one, that I've already pre-cut. You'll notice that where I cut it is actually a little larger than where I traced it. So for this tunnel I used 5 of these supports that are all cut out, and I believe that'll provide enough structural support. And there's some other things that you can do in order to help with the supporting the paper and the plaster a little bit later on, and I'll show you how it looks once you've put it all together. So this is what the tunnel lining looks like once you've put it all together, and basically what I've done is hot glued these arches to these strips that we pre-cut and measured out, and then to support it I added this little like L brackets piece that's also made out of cardboard. I just hot glued them all together all the way down to one end. Now one thing I find to also help with making the structure a little stronger is staggering the L brackets. So there's one on this side of the tunnel portal, and then on the other side it's on the opposite side of the one I just showed you, and that just helps center it a little bit and make it stand up straight. And then obviously the ones on the ends just have 2 L brackets sitting on the same side, and it's pretty durable. It's not too flimsy. Obviously that's gonna be determined by the cardboard you use. I use some pretty heavy cardboard, which is used for like boxes that you send in the mail, that sort of thing. So that's what it looks like once you've got all the pieces cut out and glued together. And like I said, I just hot glued them and used these little cardboard L brackets that I made in order to add some more support. Now before you go any further, you're going to want to make sure to test fit it. This is the first time that I've actually put this in place, and it took a little more messing around than I had anticipated. I had to cut away a lot of foam, a lot more foam that I already had, and kind of mess around with all of the paper and cardboard. But I got it in there. It is a little bit more difficult if your tunnel is slightly curved, because you got angles to work with. And then on top of that, I already have most of the sub-scenery in place, so I don't have much room to work with when sliding this through. But I got it in there and it works well, so I'm going to go ahead and take this back out and continue the process. So the next step includes more cardboard, and you're going to cut out a bunch of strips similar to this, probably about 3 or 4 the length of your tunnel, and we're going to go ahead and install them into the tunnel. So stay tuned and I'll show you what it looks like. So for this next step, basically what you're going to be doing is strengthening the entire or the overall structure of the tunnel lining. And how you're going to do this is by cutting out cardboard strips similar to this. Obviously they might be different in length for you, because I have cut these to fit directly between the upright supports, and this flat side here is going to be glued in place so that it rests flush with the entire underside of the tunnel lining. And you're going to repeat this 3 times. You're going to do some up top, one on this side, and one on this side, the entire length of the tunnel portal. Now you can, if you want to make things a little easier and less time consuming, is cut the portal upright a little bit larger and just lay 3 strips of cardboard the entire length of the tunnel lining on the sides and on the top. But the only issue I see with that is the fact that it won't sit flush with everything else, and when you go to glue the paper in there, it's going to be noticeable that there's cardboard underneath on the top and the sides. So give me a few minutes while I go ahead and install all of these strips of cardboard on the top. I'll show you what it looks like, and then I'll go ahead and do the sides, and that'll be the last major step in making your, or one of the last major steps anyway, of making your tunnel line. Alright, so I have installed the sections of cardboard in between each upright support, and they're all connected together. So this is what it looks like. With curved tunnel portals, you might have to bend the cardboard on a bit of an angle, which isn't that big of a deal. But that is what it looks like, and if you look down, you'll see that all of those pieces of cardboard are flush with the top of the arch of the uprights. And what that's going to do, and along with the pieces that you're going to glue onto the sides, is it's not only going to add some structural support, but it allows for an additional place to glue the painter's paper to when we go ahead and line the tunnel. So stay tuned, and I will be back once I have completed the sides and show you what it looks like complete. I'm back. I've finished gluing the cardboard strips on the insides of the upright supports on both sides, and then the top you've already seen. So this is kind of what it looks like. It almost looks like a cage in a sense. And then obviously the sides, I did the same thing as the roof and glued it flush with the upright supports all the way down. So now that this is complete, we can move to the next step, which is actually adding the lining to it, or the start of the lining anyway. So this next step is where the painter's paper comes into play. What you're going to want to do is cut a piece that is large enough to fit on the insides of your tunnel lining frame. And basically, I usually test fit it before I do that. And just kind of press it in place like so. You can see that I have lots of excess on the ends and on the sides, so that's plenty. And then what I usually do, just to kind of give it that tunnel lining feel, is I crumple it all up. Like so. So just before I start gluing the painter's paper into the inside of the tunnel, just a quick tip: when you're doing this, the way I found it to be easiest when gluing it in place is starting at the top of the tunnel, gluing straight down the middle, pressing it in place, letting it dry for a minute or two, and then working down the sides all the way to the bottom. That way you're not messing around and trying to get into weird angles, because it is already an awkward angle to access with the hot glue gun. So working from the top down just seems to work the best when doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and install the paper now, and I'll show you what it looks like complete. Alright, so the paper has since been glued fully into place, and still have to cut off the excess, which I'll do in a minute, and then show you what it looks like without. But that's what the tunnel lining looks like at this point in the process. So it's starting to come together, starting to look like what it needs to look like, and if you really want to, you can leave it at that point after you cut off the excess and just paint the inside, because there is enough texture created by crumpling up the painter's paper that if you're really not too concerned about it, it'll represent what it needs to represent. But I'll show you how I take it one step further to adding that texture. So just real quick, this is what it looks like with the excess cut off. Just looks a little cleaner. Obviously you don't want to install it with all that excess paper, so that's what it looks like. And then we're just going to go ahead now and paint the inside with white glue. Just finished painting the inside of the tunnel lining with glue, and I recommend that you use a fair amount of glue, because when it hardens, what it's going to do is it's going to provide a nice hard shell for us to apply the spackling or drywall plaster to the inside to add some texture. Because without that, the paper is too flimsy and it will sag with the plaster in there, and you might have areas where your trains can't actually clear because of it. The other thing to note when doing this is when you apply the glue, or really anything that is somewhat of a liquid to paper, obviously the paper softens up a little bit. So just be careful when you're brushing in there that you don't brush too hard or use a brush that's too coarse, otherwise you might end up ripping the paper. And that will be the same for when you put the plaster on the inside of the tunnel lining, because obviously being activated by water, the white glue gets activated by water and moisture, so it tends to soften up a little bit later on down the road when we apply the plaster. So just be aware of that when you're entering this stage of the project. Now we'll let this cure overnight and come back tomorrow and apply the plaster. So we're back the next day here, and as you can see, the glue has since dried, and that has created a nice firm shell all the way through. You can hear from me tapping that it's much more durable than what it used to be with just the paper, and now it's ready for plaster. So I'm back, and as you can see, there is one layer of plaster in there. Now, there's enough texture there that it looks like an actual blasted tunnel. Now, as this sets and as this dries, depending on the consistency of your plaster and how long you work it for, some of it may settle and smooth out a little bit. I've been working mine for about 10-15 minutes now, and some of it's beginning to set, so I shouldn't have too much of an issue there. And how I do this, just show you, it's really simple. So I just take the putty knife here, and I just spread the plaster on the inside until there is a layer all the way across, and I go ahead with a smaller little spatula here, and I just go and dab it like so. I keep dabbing it all the way around both sides, and what this does is as I press the little spatula into the plaster, it grips onto it, and as I pick it up or pull away, it also takes the plaster with it a little bit, so it creates these little texture patterns in there. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're kind of changing the angle and the position of your putty knife, maybe using a couple different sizes, because if you go along the sides and all in a parallel fashion, you'll start to see that parallel lines in the plaster, which may not be a bad thing. If you're looking for that kind of texture, then by all means continue to do that, but I like to keep a fairly inconsistent pattern and texture within the tunnel lining to make it more natural. So now that that's done, we're going to let it cure, and once it's cured, I generally like to let it cure for an entire day. We'll go ahead and paint it. So in front of you is actually the tunnel lining for my second tunnel on the layout, and this is the one that I did first before I showed you the one that we are almost complete. And for time's sake in creating this video and getting it out to you, I'm just going to show you what a finished product looks like and when it's painted. Now I just finished painting this about 20 minutes ago, so the paint is still a little bit damp and a little bit shiny. But as you can see, this tunnel has a lot more of a curve to it, which is a good example for those of you who are trying to create a curved tunnel. And as I mentioned in the early stages of this video, you basically just have to find the right curvature of your initial base pieces, and then you just do the same thing as you line those base pieces with your cutouts. So obviously the plaster on this is dry. It's been dried out for like 2 or 3 days, and then I just recently painted it. And I painted it using light grays, dark grays, blacks, and rust colors. So you may or may not be able to tell, but there's a few like rust iron streaks in there. And I just made the colors relatively inconsistent. It's a little more difficult to see in there because it's dark and it shadows really well. But you get the picture. And I'll go ahead and set this on the layout, and I'll show you what it will look like when it's in place. Here's what it looks like when the tunnel liner is installed on the layout. Sorry if you hear any paper crumpling around. It's just the mountains that I've recently installed. So you can tell when the light hits it in a certain way, it does look like rock formations, and then when you set the tunnel portal, which obviously has yet to be weathered and installed permanently, you can see that that tunnel lining looks really good and really realistic. And obviously you have to ballast and everything in there, so it's not 100% complete just yet. A little more difficult to see on this side, but you get the picture. So now that we've reached the finished product, that'll conclude today's how-to video. So with that said, thank you once again for tuning into my channel. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and comment below. And hopefully that'll spark my interest and I'll get these types of videos uploaded a little more frequently and get more projects done on the layout so that I can share some of my tips and techniques that I utilize on a daily basis.